Everybody. Now we are officially recording in progress. Awesome. I am going, the very first thing that I would like for y'all to do is go ahead and put your name in the chat box. We're going to capture all of the lovely attendees who are here today. And that's the way that we're going to be able to get that information. I'm going to share my screen and share the audio. All right, I need a thumbs up to make sure that everybody sees this. Awesome. All right, so today is going to be a morning, whoopsie daisy. Today is going to be about communication strategies. Communication strategies to empower your day-to-day as caretakers and as parents. And the goal that I have at hand is for you to think and feel about ways to engage, ways to encourage, and ultimately ways to empower your child's communication skills. My name is Phuong Lien Palafox, and I am receiving compensation for the time that I am sharing with you all today. In terms of non-financial relationships, I don't have any of those to talk about, except for the fact that I have a very, very passionate relationship with public education and with being a speech and language scientist and advocate. Emotions are my superpower. So I cry on a daily basis. So at some point you may see some wet eyeballs. I want to let you know that I'm okay with it. Usually it means that something is very meaningful. And this topic is very meaningful to me as an educator, a service provider, and also as a parent. So at this time, what we are going to do is we're going to go ahead and break out into our breakout sessions. And so, Stephanie, I'm going to give you a quick second to do what you need to do so that you all can join the groups that will support and fuel you the most. Just give me the green light to go whenever I can resume.
The breakout rooms are open, so we're just waiting on folks to join those rooms.
Fantastic. As families are joining the rooms, I just want to say that this is a pretty special, meaningful event for us to be able to offer this to our families and for you to have language access to the content. So I'm very grateful for Coppell ISD's efforts in making this happen.
Yeah, and while we're getting this part set up, if you have not put your full name in the chat yet, go ahead and do that, and that will mark your attendance for today. Okay, I think that our rooms are assigned, so we are good to go.
All right, here we go. So let us get into formation, parents and caretakers, about what I'm going to say about the next hour and a half-ish is going to look like. And after we have our presentation, there's also going to be a discussion and dialogue portion at the end. If you have more specific questions, if you potentially want to introduce yourself and connect with families, it's really an open forum for us to have some more intimate conversations. So this portion of the presentation, first we're going to talk about your needs as parents. Next, you're going to get kind of a communication 101. Think of my undergraduate degree and my graduate degree all smushed into some really concise, meaningful, functional slides. So you're going to learn about communication. Next, we're going to go through evidence-based practices. So that's the fancy words for where's the research for supporting your child's functional communication needs. And then the last part of this presentation, we are really going to focus on access to neurotypical social skills. Now, I will say that all of this are all of the technical words that I tell school districts and I put on pieces of paper when I do national presentations. But honestly, at the heart of all of this is each time I get to spend time with families or alongside my educators, I kind of drop into my heart. And it really is about the feelings that we have to empower our children, to fuel our children, and then also to support ourselves as parents and caretakers. So I wanted to take a brief moment to tell you about why in the world I have the mic today and why Coppell ISD has kindly and generously given me their time for this academic school year. I did my studies at the University of Texas and UW-Madison. I have spent the last 20 years or so alongside school districts as a speech language pathologist, supporting my students across all grade levels. And then over the years, I got more responsibility, supported a large district and all of their speech language pathologists, then supported about 60 plus school districts in the middle of Central Texas in the same endeavors. And while I was doing that at Region 13, I was one of the members of the autism team. We were the state lead in autism for the state of Texas, worked at a clinical setting for about 7 to 8 years. So I understand the school needs. I also understand the clinical needs. I do not shame any setting. And I'm really all about ways for us to work collaboratively together using our own individualized complementary skills. I've written books about the field of speech and language sciences. And in the last couple of years, I get to have my own clinic. I see a small handful of clients, but a majority of my time is spent alongside school districts and state organizations in this really meaningful work. But I also want to acknowledge too that before all of this happened, right, I was a Vietnamese refugee. My father navigated a boat across a big ocean, and I was born the day they landed in Hong Kong. I grew up as a bilingual, bicultural individual. And so, you know, when I talk about some of these aspects as well of communication, it is through my own lived experience. Now, I feel, so I'm a mother of three. My children are 13, 11, and 7. And I think for all parents and caretakers, when our children are placed in our arms as babies, or when we are meeting them for the first time, fostering our children, adopting our children, we have a vision for them and we have dreams for them. And we know that our job is to keep them safe and to support them in their individual journeys to be the best version of them that they can be. What I have learned early on in my profession is that whether it be you getting quiet whisperings of, I think there's something going on, I think she may need some more support with her communication, or, you know what, I think they're behind their peers when it comes to communication, or I don't think he's talking yet, and I think he should be, or whether it be an educator, someone in Coppell ISD potentially, who comes to you and says, you know, we have some concerns with their language and their communication. And I want us to take a moment to honor what that really means, because we have meetings in the schools, we have conversations, and we have conferences. But whenever we hear that information, and for me to hear information about my own children, is that there's grief in that, because the path that we thought we were going to take is now going to be a different path. And to be honest, we don't even know what this new path is going to look like. So I always want to let families know that I honor this challenging, new, and difficult path. But I also want to let you know that this new path is going to be just as meaningful to your child and to your family. And I just wanted to honor that part of it. We're going to begin with some stories of families that I've had the privilege of moving alongside on their children's communication journeys. I feel like in our schools, And in the paperwork that we fill out, we get a lot of information from parents. I also feel like there are educators who are getting the stories behind that information, and you need both that detailed formal information, but we also need the qualitative information. This is Anne, and she said, you know, William's teacher believed he needed further testing. At first, I was really upset. I almost cried in that teacher conference. The future flashed in front of my eyes, and I had no idea what William's full potential would be as an adult. I knew that he didn't talk much, but I had no idea how significantly this would affect him. I'm lucky in the fact that I was a part of her son's um, communication journey when he was in first grade. I also support him now as a college sophomore. And so it's been really, there's been a lot of big feelings around being a part of their journey through all of these years. Next is Julie's story. She is the mother to Ollie. Just the idea of setting Ollie up with therapies was overwhelming. If I'm being honest, the idea of therapy was uncomfortable for me because I didn't want Ollie to need it. Figuring out the insurance, finding the right therapist, fitting it into the schedule. It all felt like a mountain that I did not feel equipped to climb. And beyond the logistics, there was a lot of emotions I was sorting through about Ollie's diagnosis and his future. So now this next portion, so we are going to surely be on a path about communication. And along the way, I'm going to take you down some smaller paths. So at the very beginning now, I want to give a foundation for what happens in our brain whenever we think about communication. And so if you direct yourselves to the right side of the screen, I have the words language expression on one side. And so language expression is how we express ourselves. I will say that in our world, we usually center speaking as the communication form that we use the most, which a majority of this world does. I also want to acknowledge, though, that language expression also includes all forms of language expression. That is also using gestures. Examples of that would be American Sign Language. And then for individuals who are non-speaking, an expressive way of communicating would be to use pictures and visuals. Sometimes that's embedded in a communication system. Sometimes it's through the exchange of pictures on a card. And so one part of our work in communication is the expressive language. And now I want to direct your eyeballs to the left-hand side. And this is the language understanding part. Language understanding is, you know, some of the things that we do in that arena is being able to follow directions. Does your child understand when you give a two-step direction? So if I tell my kids, hey, pick up your socks off the floor and go put it in the hamper in my room. Okay, two-step direction. That also includes understanding vocabulary and concepts of size, concepts of descriptor words. And then right here too, when it comes to language understanding, you know, it's all of these things that are kind of getting inputted and poured into our brain to see if we understand it. This also includes the language that families are using in the beginning of their child's life. And so that could be, for me, it was Vietnamese. It could be English, Tagalog, Urdu, Tamil, all of the languages there. And so when we think about communication, we need to think about these two sides equally. The input that is being poured in, and then the expressive aspects of it. I will say that in my corner of the world, I see a majority of us focusing on this output part of it, but we need to look at both sides. And as I talk about the strategies in a little bit, you're going to see why both sides are important and valuable and how they work together as well. So for me, as a communication specialist, we support language understanding and language expression, just like I've talked about. We also support speech sound productions. So how children are able to make their sounds in order for them to be intelligible enough for others to understand their messages. We also work in the arena of stuttering advocacy. And while I will not dive into specifics today for the purposes of this course, I do want to say that stuttering research has changed significantly during the tenure that I've been a speech language pathologist. Whereas 20 years ago, people really focused on being fluent. How do you use strategies so that you don't have the stuttering moments, you don't have those bumps? And now what we are learning when it comes to this is that the focus should not be on the fluency. The focus is going to be on the advocacy. It is okay for you to stutter. And part of that is owning who the students are, and that is a part of their communication. Now, for some students, does that include some fluency shaping skills? Yes, but it really is about how they feel comfortable in their own skin and how they can advocate for themselves as a stutterer. And then the last arena that we're going to focus on, and in my job, is social skills advocacy, and specifically neurotypical social skills. And I'm going to talk more about that a little bit later on. So my job is to empower humanity to communicate their meaningful, worthy stories. And every single human being on this earth has a right to a communication system where they can get their needs met as an individual. So here's the path. Now we're taking our first little jaunt down this little path. And I want to begin here talking about just a couple of slides about multilingualism. Our families who have exposure to more than one language, or their heritage language is a language outside of our majority language of English. The most important thing that I want people to know, and this has been my mission, and this is my mission moving forward until the last earthly day that I am here, is that bilingualism does not cause communication delays. There has been some, I'm going to say some bad PR out there that says that if a child is bilingual, multilingual, now some children are speaking 3, 4, and 5 languages, that it's going to contribute to communication delays. And this is not the case. So for families who do have exposure to another heritage language, so again, I'll use me as an example, grew up learning Vietnamese up until the age of 5, is that I am letting families know to continue to communicate in their heritage language at home. Why? One, it supports academics. The reason why it supports academics is because you want a rich, thorough, exposure to a language. And so as parents, as caretakers, let's say if I spoke Tagalog, I'm going to use Tagalog with my children. And over time, my grammar gets more complicated. I use more vocabulary words as my kids get older, and it kind of thickens up and fills in this nice, strong language foundation. Now it's time for my kids to go to school. And so most schools, right, or all schools, the instruction is in English. So as they're learning that second language, because they have this nice foundation of a language, it's going to support acquisition of that second language. Now, if we were to tell families to stop speaking their first language, what kind of happens? I think about it as like Swiss cheese. There's going to be holes and gaps in that foundational language skills. And so by continuing to speak your home language, you support the teachers at school. The second aspect is that by continuing to communicate in your heritage language, you are fueling their communication progress. Okay, and so the same kind of thinking is that when you fill in that robust language, your family's language, and then English is added to it, you're going to be supporting their language skills in both languages. And then the very last part, which we cannot quantify, and for me, it's such an important aspect, is that we are honoring your family's history, your family's lived experiences. You are honoring the culture, and that is meaningful and valuable as well. All families have a culture and they have stories that their families have lived through. And so these are the reasons why we are going to continue to support your child's academics and communication and honor your family by surely holding that home language close and to continue to use it. I want to say that when it comes to bilingualism, it does change though through the decades, and it does change with each generation. And there's no right or wrong when it comes to this. Changes are changes. So over here on the right-hand side in 1955, this is my Apo and this is my Onwai, my maternal grandparents in Vietnam. Now, even though they lived in Vietnam, culturally, their families, both of their families are Chinese. My mom's and family there. So at home, they spoke solely Chinese. But then when they went out there into the world to work and to interact with the community, they spoke Vietnamese. Now, here are my parents who knew both Mandarin, Cantonese, Vietnamese. My dad also knew French. They made a choice whenever I was born, after getting off that boat across the South China Sea, to only speak Vietnamese to me. So that was my language up until entering kindergarten at R.F. Hartman Elementary School in the Wiley Independent School District in the Dallas area. That was the first time I was exposed to English on a consistent basis. And now for me, as a mom, I primarily speak English because I'm married to a partner who does speak English. I will say when my father lived with me, I did both English and Vietnamese. And all three of my children are currently or have been in a dual language program through the Austin Independent School District, Summit Elementary School, where they have an education where half their day is in English and half the day is in Vietnamese. So I say all of this because our children are going to have a language or languages potentially, and it may look differently than your own, which also looks differently from the generation prior to you. And I think oftentimes we use language like, oh, Phuong, your Vietnamese isn't as good as X, Y, or Z. Or, oh, Phuong, you don't know how to read or write Vietnamese, which I don't because I didn't go to school in Vietnam. But whenever we make those judgments, right, it's judgment, and that all languages are worthy and the human beings who are attached to them. When I think about languages, I think a lot about our families, and this is for communicators of all languages, is that the work that we do in communication has to be done alongside you as the family, because you are the life experts. You are the key decision makers, and you have the lifespan perspective. Now, for me, as the educator, I'm the content expert. I know a lot about communication, and we can't have these two separate entities. The system, right, the laws and the mandates are written in a way for us to work alongside one another. Now, I acknowledge that is harder said than done, but whenever I think and I have a student across this U-shaped table in my classroom and I look into their eyeballs, for me, the transformation with communication is maximized when I see that child as a part of your family unit. So I need to do my work to earn your trust, right, for us to work together. Okay, so the next mini slides, pretty much until the very end, I call them power strategies. And these are strategies that have landed in meaningful ways for my families in the last 2 decades or so. And so the first strategy is When we think about communication, I am going to be very transparent and say that the assessments that we use to test your child and the forms that we use, it is from a deficit model. It's saying, what are the things that your child is not able to do? And so whenever we do that, right, we have deficits right here. And then you fill out all the forms or you tell us your needs and the concerns. I want to take that idea and I want to turn it upside down. And in that movement, I will say that communication is going to grow at a faster rate and at a more impactful rate when we think about your child's strengths. What are they able to do right now? And your child's interests. What is he interested in? What does she love to do every day if we were to leave her alone and did not interrupt this one thing that she is doing? So the visuals that I have chosen for this slide are very intentional. They are interests and strengths. They kind of go hand in hand. That I have, that my current clients or students in the past have demonstrated. So in graduate school at Wisconsin, I worked alongside a family where, and I have permission to share some of the names, where John loved horses as a fourth grader and a fifth grader. And now, fast forward almost 20 years later, he is, I think now in his 30s. He actually just texted me because he just moved to Minnesota and he works in a horse ranch where he grooms horses and he teaches people about grooming horses. But that interest was fostered and it was utilized as qualitative data for us to work on and support his communication skills. I have another 4-year-old right now who can tell me everything about a dinosaur. I called it, what was it? It's a brachiosaurus. Oh, I called it a brontosaurus. And he was like, no, Miss Phuong, it's a brachiosaurus. And I was like, all right, noted. We use dinosaurs in his speech and language therapy to grow his communication. I have a college student right now who loves and knows a lot of information about hot sauce, the different kinds, the different varieties, the different levels. And so we talk about that. And then I communicated with parents a couple of weeks ago who were just needing some help and support in knowing what resources were out there. And I asked them, they wanted support for their 2 sons. And I said, what do they love? And they were talking about their younger child loving music. And they were like, he loves to listen to music all day long. And I was like, you know what? Foster that. Talk about that, feel that, engage in that. And that's where communication is going to come out. It's going to be more meaningful for your child, for you to engage in these topics to grow their communication versus bringing in an activity that is not related to them that might feel extra. And I will tell you as a parent, the battle in just doing something is a real thing. And so this may be something that may help. All right. Next power strategy. So when we think about communication needs, we are going to center your child in the middle of it. And when I say your child, there is a reason why this kind of looks like a sun. They are a light and we're going to grow their light. This is what we get to do as parents and caretakers. This is what I get to do as an educator. And that doesn't mean what they are not yet able to do. I believe in the power of yet, but it's really looking at their strengths and their interests and the things that are valuable to them, okay? Outside of that ring is this idea of autonomy. Now, for some of you, you are a parent or a caretaker of a young child. For others, your child is an adult, right? 18, 19, 20, 21. We support students all the way through. Okay. And so autonomy is for them to have jurisdiction and control over their own lives. It does not feel good when someone comes up and says, hey, I want you to do it like this all the time. Now, does that mean that as parents, we do not get to guide them and set boundaries and parameters? That's not what I'm saying. You definitely do need boundaries. And it's a both and we need to give them autonomy, which also contributes to this idea of self-determination. right? You have choice, you have control. It goes hand in hand with autonomy. And with all of that in mind, we're going to think about their needs. I am not the biggest fan of the word deficits or weaknesses. I don't think any earthly human being is a deficit or is a weakness. You are a whole thing, and I'm going to recognize all of that. But we all have needs, and needs are things that we get to work alongside them together, right? So they can have all of their skills in their toolkit to function in the world. Speaking of function, another power strategy is when we are thinking about how to grow their communication skills. If we were to purposely engage intentionally in vocabulary and modeling, which I'm going to get to, I'm kind of layering this whole thing on, is that if we think about it embedded within our daily functional routines, you're going to get bigger gains with their communication progress. Now, as a mom, every morning I wake up, I have to clean myself and bathe and get ready. And then I start getting the rest of the house up, right? And so my husband and I, we're getting kids up, they're getting dressed at their own level of independence or not, getting lunches packed, helping them to help themselves to pack their own lunches, all the things. You get to school. I have 3 kids at 3 different schools. Then there is working for us, then all of the home chores, then pick up, dinner, homework, bath time, maybe, and then bedtime routine, which is exhausting. Even talking about it, I feel like is triggering for me. So if you're going to do these things and then go to bed, repeat, right? So wake up, do all the things, repeat, repeat, repeat. If you were to embed your communication work within these functional routines, it's going to make your functional routines easier, and it's going to provide the communication your child needs to exist within these functional routines. They also get to practice it on a daily basis. So let me give you an example. So on the left-hand side, here is a young lady, and she's 5 now, but at the time she was 3. And this child loved watching her parents cook. And so she loved it. She would watch it. She would want to help. And so in speech language therapy, I pulled out the microwave and the mugs and the containers and all of these things. And I don't have fancy things. It's really about how we use them. And so the vocabulary that we're working on and her requesting things and making comments, it's all related to this one functional routine that the family has and that she is really invested in. Remember that first slide? What are they interested in? Well, Milan is interested in cooking and doing all of the things that Papi and Mama are doing. On the right-hand side is an example of how I embedded functional communication skills for an adult. At the time, he was a freshman in college, and he wanted to do really well in his English composition class. And so the goals that we had on the for speech and language was organizing content, figuring out main idea, providing details, using descriptive language. And because I asked him, hey, what's important to you? Like, what are your goals for speech language therapy? He said, I want to do well in my class. I want you to help me with my papers. And so for me as the professional, I found ways to it's kind of like the Venn. Here are his needs. Here is what the testing demonstrated and the functional outcomes of that testing, and finding kind of that middle ground where we can work on those skills. But those are 2 functional routines that also fuel communication. A strategy, this is one of my faves. I call it the +1 strategy, and it has to do with modeling language. Now, whenever we think about our children's communication, one easy way for you to grow their communication is for you to model it, to just say what they are working towards. Now, the thing about the +1 is that you have to do a little bit of your own work. And you have to figure out about how long your child's sentences or utterances are. Now, if your child is non-speaking, something to consider is that when you are engaging in like, you know what, I'm going to be thinking about their communication right now. And I know you can't think about speech language pathology skills all day long, and I don't expect for you to. I tell parents, if you can find one moment out of your day that's embedded in a routine where you have some space around your head in that moment, maybe that's a time to be like, you know what, I'm really going to actively work on their communication skills. It would be exhausting for you to do it all day long. So let's say this is playtime with your child, and you notice that your child is kind of speaking at a one-word utterance level, and they're pretty much labeling truck, mama, milk, baby. So what I would do to model that is I would +1. So they're using about one word on average. So I'm going to +1, so that's 2. So when I model something back to them, I'm going to use a 2-word utterance. I think as adults, we are really good about providing more language. We're also really good, based on my observations, to get our child to repeat after us, which, you know, having them repeat after us is a form of modeling, but having them repeat after us all the time is taking away from the opportunity for them to create their own spontaneous communication. So here's an example of the +1 rule. So if your child is playing and you're like, you know what, for these next 5 minutes, I'm going to sit down with my kid and really engage in this communication and to really think about growing their communication. And Harper is playing with these dolls, and Harper says, baby. And you go, oh, you're going to +1 it. You're going to go, oh, baby cries, or the baby's crying. You're just going to model it. And so know that the modeling is where the power is. Wait time is a power strategy that allows for us to understand how much processing, blah, blah, blah. I just added a couple of syllables there. Processing time our children need. Again, I will say that as adults, we are really good about asking a question. And then if our kid doesn't respond within like half a second, we ask the question again. The example that I'm going to use that I know the most about is myself. So if I tell my 13-year-old, hey, Zachy, I need for you to pick up your socks, and he doesn't do it or move like immediately, I say it again. Zach, pick up your socks. I said to pick up your socks. So that is my mothering persona, which is true and valid. But every time I'm telling him to do something, it's kind of like his brain is kind of restarting. And honestly, in this case, I know that I'm annoying him. How do I know this? Well, because he's saying, stop it, mother. You've already told me this. Now, I will say in my professional domain, usually on average, what I do is I wait about 10 seconds after I give a modeling statement, kind of like that baby cries that we just talked about, or when I ask a question, I'm giving my student, my client space to take in that information, to process it, and then to potentially give a response, whether through speaking or through gesturing or with their communication board or device. Now, waiting 10 seconds is a long time. So we are going to practice it now. And you're going to say, really? And I'm going to be like, yep. You're going to see how long it takes to wait for 10 seconds. And I will tell you, this strategy yields a lot of outcome on the other side. It is also one of the hardest things that I have seen educators and parents need to do. Now, can you do this all day long? You can't. As a parent, you can't. We got places to go, things to eat, bodies to clean. But if you do this in this intentional period that you're going to choose, it's going to impact their communication abilities. So I'm going to set my timer on my cell phone, and I'm going to say my stopwatch. I'm going to say begin, and we're going to see what 10 seconds feels like. Ready, set, go. We're at 6 seconds, 8, 9, 10. All right. So that's how long, when I ask a question, I wait for before maybe modeling again or giving a choice for my students. I want to give an example here. This is something that happened about a decade ago now, and I still think about this moment. So I was supporting at a school whenever I was working at the regional level. And this was a classroom that supported students with different communication needs, working on functional life skills. And it was time for this student, and he was in 5th grade at the time, to sit down and work. And so I have all of my visuals on this chain in order to give my like, here's what I'd like for you to do. So I said, it's time to work. And I gave him the visual of work. And I know that this student knows when Ms. Phuong shows this visual and pairs it with my verbalization of it, it's time to work with the visual. He knows it's time to work. Well, he gets up, and instead of walking toward his desk, he started walking towards an area of the classroom that is built for him to cool down and to have quiet moments. So he goes over there, and then he lays down. Now, the classroom teacher was like, she was about to jump in, and I knew that she was. And I'm like, let's just wait and see. I already gave him the directive with a visual, and I paired it with my own verbal saying of it. Let's just see what happens. And so, right, based on what I said, I waited the 10 seconds and he didn't move. And I said, just out of curiosity, curiosity is a lovely, beautiful thing. Let's just see what happens. So we just sit there and we wait, and a minute passes. And at this point, I was like, I'm trying to think, what am I going to do next? Am I going to approach him, use the visual again? What are we doing? And then it gets to the 2-minute mark. He slowly gets up. He walks slowly toward his desk. He sits down. He had baskets of these work activities that the classroom was doing, and they're numbered 1 through 3. He pulled out the number 1 basket, he put it on his desk, and he started his work. Now, this tells me potentially that this student's I'm having a hard time with that word, and that is okay. His processing time was around 2 minutes for this one directive. Now, is it that it really took this long? I'm not sure. Or was he just kind of wanting to have a little breather before he moves over to do the work? But it gave us information. It gave us data. And I think about him a lot because I think about, how much time do our kids need in order to respond to what we are telling them to do all the time? So recasting is a strategy that speech language pathologists use often. And it's when our children say something or sign something or, use their communication device to express something, and there is an error in it. So it may be a grammatical error, or maybe a vocabulary error. And so what I do is I restate what they said, but I insert the corrected version whenever I model it back. So this is also another form of modeling. The other thing too to acknowledge about this is that we don't tell our kids, hey, what you said is wrong. And honestly, nobody likes being told. And me as a 44-year-old professional, I do not like being told when I'm wrong. I'm working on these skills, but it's just a natural way for us to say, hey, here's another way of doing it. Okay, so here's an example. So I'm reading a book, and I love to do literacy-based interventions. I think books and stories fuel the world. I will not get into that today. But here I am reading a story about a hippopotamus who hiccups. I think it's called Hippopotamus. to Ollie. And Ollie says, oh, the hippo runned over here. And so very quickly, I recognize that he used the wrong verb tense in English. And so I said, he did. So I'm acknowledging that Ollie recognized what's happening because he's making a comment and he's engaging with me. And we're connecting on this thing that we are both thinking and feeling about right now. And that's pretty powerful. And I said, he did. The hippo ran over here. Ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. So I recast it and we turned the page to move on with the story. Now, I said this before, and there's a reason why I'm going to say it again. Repetition, repetition, repetition is that a power strategy is honoring all forms of expressive communication. We're going to honor the speaking. We are going to honor the gestures. We are going to honor non-speaking communication strategies through visuals. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about what words we need to use when we address all forms of communication. And I know that for families, you know, the model that we have is we want our children to talk. And my goal as a speech and language scientist is I want your child to have a consistent communication system where they can have their needs met. Now, if that's verbalizing and talking, awesome. If they are a non-speaking student, our job collectively is to use a system that's consistent, right, across school and home and in speech, where they can express what they want to express. Another power strategy is scripting routines. So I talked about modeling before. I talked about recasting, where we can insert the corrected version of whatever it is that your child stated. Scripting routines is where we are verbalizing what we are doing. And so in your daily routines, by talking about it aloud, you are providing vocabulary for your child. And thinking about that +1 rule, I look at where my students kind of where they are communicating, and then my modeling is kind of like a +1 version of that. So let's say if daddy is doing bath time, and you could say, oh, first daddy turns on the cold water. It's so cold. Now I need hot water. Hot, be careful. Then let's add some bubbles. 3 squirts or maybe 2. Now, where is your boat and your toy whale? So as we're doing these routines, if I am cooking every single day, I always model, oh, mommy has to find the pot. Should we do the big pot or the small saucepan, right? I'm using these words and I'm describing, and my kids are kind of hanging on to me. But I'm modeling these words, and that's a part of communication support. So scripting routines. So the next level, this power strategy, is where we have a routine and we're modeling it and we're using our language intentionally. And so you do it once and then you do it again. Maybe this is during playtime. And once you do something a second time, it becomes a routine. And usually it's during a time or during an activity that your child is really interested in something. So they like these repeated adventures. And I will tell you, kids like repetition. To be honest, adults like repetition too, because we like to know what the expectation is. So you set up a routine, you're using modeling and scripting it, and then you're going to stop and you're going to sabotage. Maybe the third time you do something differently. And then your kid might be like, wait a second, what just happened here? So there's a need for your child to communicate in some way. We are providing a need. As a parent, I am really good at meeting my children's needs. So much sometimes that I'm anticipating all of their needs. And so I'm not giving them this opportunity for them to express themselves for their communication, but I just have to know what's happening, right? Once you name it, then you can do differently. So let me give you an example of routine and sabotage. So here is Thuy, and Thuy loves to swing. She loves that sensory input and the feeling of the wind. And if allowed, she would swing all day long. And I have had many of students who need sensory input. And I use those sensory needs within speech language therapy to then propel their communication. So let's say I'm outside with Thuy at recess, and she runs over to the swing, and I said, oh, time to swing. And I go, oh, Miss Phuong is going to push. And I take the swing and I pull it back and back and back. Okay, this is Thuy's interests. And I say, oh, ready, set, go. And I give her a big push. Okay. And then after a couple of pushes, I go 3, 2, 1, stop. Okay. So this is me scripting a routine. So now I'm going to do it again, right? Because Thuy is like, I can swing all day. So I'm going to do it again. I'm going to pull the swing back. I'm going to say ready. I do a lot of expected pausing. Speech language pathologists do a lot of pausing. That's also wait time. And then I go ready, set, go. I big push. And I'll say push, right? I'm giving her the vocabulary. Oh, big push. Maybe another one, big push. And then I go 3, 2, 1, stop. So now she kind of knows what's happening here. Like Miss Phuong's doing this routine. We're having a lot of fun. I hear these words. But now I want to see what happens if I sabotage this routine. What is she going to do? I'm giving her an opportunity to communicate somehow. So I might say, ready, set, and just hold that swing. Now, Thuy may go, 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 go. I've modeled the word go for her. It's something that she wants. It's highly desirable. It's an interest for her. So now she has just communicated this word. And I'm like, yes, I will say I've had some magical, transformative moments coming out to recess and doing speech therapy out there. Okay. And then, or I might say ready, set, go, but not release it. And guess what Thuy does? I've had students, they're like, wait a second, hold up, something just happened. And they turn their heads. And then we have this moment of joint attention. Like, hey, you were supposed to let go of this swing right now. But that is also communicative engagement. Okay, so that is how we build up a routine and we sabotage it. I can do this playing with blocks, right? 1 block, 2 block, 3 blocks, 4 blocks. Now let's crash it. I can do this for my older students if we were looking up videos that they're really interested in on their iPad. For my client who loves hot sauce, it could be, laying out crackers, him bringing in the different types of hot sauce. And y'all, I've tried a lot of different hot sauces and had the milk ready in there to go. It could be dropping, 1, 2, 3 drops, this cracker, 1, 2, 3 drops. So I'm setting up this routine, but maybe for the 3rd cracker, I don't even pull out the bottle. So those are different ways to incorporate this routine and sabotage. So play, and I can promise you that educators at Coppell ISD and educators across the board, especially our educators in our preschool age and younger elementary age talk about the power of play. Play is not something that is superfluous. It is not extra. It is something that is needed and meaningful for our children's brains to grow. So as our children are playing, and play can exist at all ages. I do feel like as a society, we squelch it at a certain point, but I can say that for me as an adult, right, my version of play is going out there and gardening. That is my play, and it's important to me. Is that whenever we see our child playing or engaging in something that is joyful through play, we can join in that activity and meet them where they're at. When we engage with them, we're going to imitate them. We're not asking them to imitate us. We are meeting them where they are. So for example, let's say here is Bao, and he loves playing with dinosaurs, knows the species and the genus and all the things. I don't even know if I'm saying the right words. And if they're herbivores or carnivores or omnivores. And so he's playing. So his parent is going to recognize this and say, you know what? For the next 5 minutes, I'm going to engage in this play. So you're going to join in the play. And when you're joining in the play, this is a lovely opportunity for you to maybe introduce new vocabulary. Let's say you were communicating with Bao's teacher and they're learning about size concepts. And so you're going to be like, ooh, here's the big dinosaur, the Brachiosaurus, boom, boom, boom. Oh, here's the small pterodactyl. It's flying in. He's big and he's so small. But you're incorporating it, you're modeling it, you're bringing it forth in a way where his brain and heart is open, right, to this communication. You can create a routine and then sabotage or pause it. Maybe pull out a container filled with some water, not too much, because then we got to clean up the spill, or make them help us clean up the spill. And it's like, oh, the dinosaur's so thirsty. If I was doing it in Vietnamese, I'd be like, oh, dinosaur, khát nước quá, so thirsty. Let's walk. Walking, 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 walking. Oh, the dinosaur drinks. Oh, whose turn is it now? Is it the T-Rex's turn or the Stegosaurus? And your kid picks, okay, now the Stegosaurus, right? Walking, 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 Stegosaurus drinks. Maybe you're trying to model verb forms. And so maybe the third time you go, oh, and you wait, right? Or you pause to see what your child is going to do. And how awesome would it be maybe for a kid who usually just says one word utterances goes, oh, Brachiosaurus turn, because that's what you've modeled. So now they're using 2-word utterances. Walking, 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 walking. Oh, drink water. So see, you've modeled it and now they're going to be using it and they're having a lot of fun. I mentioned this before, but instead of having them copy us, we copy them. And then you are narrating the whole way through. And the word that we used before for that was scripting. Oh, now the dinosaur's tired. It's time to go to bed. And for me too, whenever I do this play and I incorporate like the vocabulary, usually the animals or the thing is doing something that is a part of our daily routine. Like Miss Phuong has a communication agenda for sure. And so it's using words that are a part of their day. Know that you can also do this with your children who are in middle school and high school. Remember, the play looks differently. And I'm going to recognize and honor that what I see whenever I go into the classroom or whenever I see clients who are older, that usually there's some type of electronic device. And so for me, I'm going to use that to get in and to communicate with them for their version of play. This also creates trust, y'all. And it lets our kids know, like, hey, what I think is important to me is also something that you recognize that's important, right? That's where we build that trust. Trust is a big thing for me. All right. When we are communicating with our children, I want you to think about what kind of questions you are asking them. And some common questions that I use and that I hear are, how was your day? What do you want to eat? And in these questions, it allows for like a one-word response. And so we call those questions closed questions. They're going to respond how you ask the question. So the opposite of a closed question then, on the other side of the continuum, is using questions that are open-ended, where they have to use more words, sentences perhaps, more dialogue to answer your question. I love the statement of tell me about. So whether it be my 13-year-old, my 11-year-old, my 9-year-old, I've supported adults all the way up until 83. But I usually begin by saying, hey, tell me about, but I'm specific too. I'm like, tell me about lunch today story. That's the name of my youngest kid. Tell me about lunch today story. Instead of saying, what did you eat? Because if I said, what'd you eat? Goldfish crackers. But I'm like, tell me about lunch. Well, you should have seen Johnny. He poured his milk on his bread and was making this mix. It was disgusting when the monitor wasn't walking around. Or if I ask Zach, like, oh, tell me about sectionals this morning. Like, what did Mr. Corpus do whenever so-and-so did this? And so then he's like, oh, mother, I do not like my band director, blah, 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 blah. But he's telling me, right? As opposed to saying, like, how was sectionals this morning? Fine. Tell me about. It also works really well for the people in your lives. And then you wait. As a speech language pathologist, I actually don't talk very much. The sessions are quiet because there's a lot of wait time and there's a lot of space in normalizing that some of us require extra time to communicate our messages. We are living in a hustle bustle world where productivity is at the top of our list for many a thing. And I have to remind myself, and honestly, being a speech language pathologist helps me with this because I'm really intentional about providing these spaces for communication. But we take it down a notch. We slow it down. That hustle isn't there. It's hard to communicate and hustle at the same time. So remember how I said we're going to take some little paths? This is another path. And this path is about the topic of autism and neurodiversity. Now, I am going to acknowledge that this is a communication course for many parents of many children with different needs. And not all parents represented here are the parents of children who have the eligibility of autism, but there are also parents here. And I want to take a moment to talk about this idea of neurodiversity. So what is it? Maybe you've heard it on social media or in the news, or maybe even within the educational spaces that you've had alongside your educators. This speaks to a continuum of brain differences, and embedded in neurodiversity is dispelling brain differences as valuable rather than something to fix. So remember when I talked at the very beginning about some structures being a deficit model? And whenever I think about autism, and this is me talking, and I acknowledge it and recognizing that I am someone who demonstrates neurotypical social skills. And I'm aware and I use these social skills all the time. And it was not hard for me to learn these social skills because I'm a part of that majority culture of being neurotypical. But when we think about autism specifically, or ADD or ADHD, that it's actually a brain difference and that it's not something for us to fix. People do not need fixing. People require their their support for their needs, but that's a difference in thinking. And that difference in thinking contributes to how we approach things. Ideologies of neurodiversity work toward removing stigmas for brain differences. And it places the workload on educators and mainstream society to accept the continuum of neurodiversity. Now, I bring up this topic because I feel like this is a heated, hot button topic. And I will say that for me, I am in a season in my life in my mid 40s where I feel comfortable talking about some of these things that are hard and they're very gray. And so if we think about some of the tools that we use within an educational setting, they're looking at autism as something that we need to potentially change. I will say though, that there are educators and in communicating with Coppell ISD, and I get to do presentations across the nation, is that educators are looking at our students as a whole child. And so I feel like there have been educators that have carried out these ideas of neurodiversity decades ago, and now there's just a word for us to talk about it. But really looking at our child and saying, you know what? We're going to support you and we're going to honor you just as you are with your interests and with your needs. And so, but I did want to bring that forth. Now, for me, something, and I told you I was on the state team as an autism specialist. And now people, you know, they'll reach out and they'll say, we'd like for you to do this keynote for this autism conference. And something that I have been intentional about is saying, you know what? I am not autistic. I am not a person with autism. And I feel like right now, people who are speaking up and communicating out are people who have this eligibility and who have this diagnosis. And it is important for us to digest their lived experiences. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I need to hear the stories. You know, I remember the young man who was a college sophomore where so he's a college sophomore right now. And I remember early on, whenever he was a freshman, you know, he was starting his college classes. And his eligibilities in school, when he was in school, was autism, speech impairment. And in college, he was realizing that he was taking a lot of time to take the notes, and he was moving at a slower pace than his peers, his neurotypical peers. And so he was about to have a meeting with his college advisor, and he wanted to talk about ways to support his learning needs as an autistic individual. And for this young man, he used identity first language. He called himself, he said, I am autistic. And that's how he preferred to be referenced. And so in our session, we talked about strategies for advocacy, self-advocacy. And I mean, I was excited. I felt like he was empowering himself to recognize him and his worth and, you know, all the things, since I've known him since he was 6. And so he went and had the meeting with the advisor, and he came back, and I was like, OM goodness, tell me how it was whenever you talked about your needs as an autistic individual, and you know, you needed to have notes beforehand and da 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 da. And he looked at me and he was like, Miss Phuong, I didn't tell him I'm autistic. And I looked at him, and knowing myself, I know that it was probably a look of like, you know, we talked about this. And he he looked at me and he was like, Miss Phuong, that's my story to share. And I didn't want to share it. And in that moment, it was a self-check, right? Going back to autonomy and self-determination. This is his life, and he gets to choose and direct how it's going to be. And he's absolutely right. Right? Like, I was thinking of this like, hey, this is going to help you, da 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 da. And he is thinking, I have control over my life, and he was not ready yet, or he may never be ready to disclose that information, because that is vulnerable information. And for you to dispel vulnerable information, you need to feel safe in doing so. And he didn't feel safe yet, and I'm going to honor that. But that was him having the trust to tell me, right, hey, you need to back it off, because this is what I did, because I didn't want to do it. So this is Rosie King, and she had a TED Talk, and I'm going to play this TED Talk. It's a few minutes, and she prefers identity first language also, and as an autistic individual, and also the big sister to two brothers with the same diagnosis. She shares a really meaningful perspective. So I'm going to stop share. I say out loud whenever I'm going to do something because it helps to walk me through. I have the video loaded up already. I am going to share the sound. I'm going to click on that. Here we go. I've got to move your lovely boxes out of the way. All right. And I'm going to shrink these boxes now. All right. I'm going to play the video.
I haven't told many people this, but in my head, I've got thousands of secret worlds all going on all at the same time. I'm also autistic. People tend to diagnose autism with really specific checkbox descriptions, but in reality, there's a whole variation as to what we're like. For instance, my little brother, he's very severely autistic. He's nonverbal, he can't talk at all, but I love to talk. People often associate autism with liking maths and science and nothing else, but I know so many autistic people who love being creative. But that is a stereotype, as the stereotypes for things are often, if not always, wrong. For instance, a lot of people who think autism and think Rain Man immediately. That's the common belief that every single autistic person is Dustin Hoffman, and that's not true. But that's not just with autistic people either. I've seen it with LGBTQ people, with women, with POC people. People are so afraid of variety that they try and fit everything into a tiny little box with really specific labels. Like, this is something that actually happened to me in real life. I Googled autistic people are, and you know, it like comes up with suggestions as to what you're going to type. I Googled autistic people are, and the top result was demons. That is the first thing that people think when they think autism. They know. One of the things I can do because I'm autistic, it's an ability rather than a disability, is I've got a very, very vivid imagination. Like, let me explain it to you a bit. It's like I'm walking into worlds most of the time. There's the real world, the world that we all share, and there's the world in my mind. And the world in my mind is often so much more real than the real world. Like, it's very easy for me to let my mind loose because I don't try and fit myself into a tiny little box. That's one of the best things about being autistic. You don't have the urge to do that. You find what you want to do, you find a way to do it, and you get on with it. If I was trying to fit myself into a box, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have achieved half the things that I have now. There are problems, though. There are problems with being autistic. And there are problems with having too much imagination. Like, school can be a problem in general, but having also to explain to a teacher on a daily basis that their lesson is inexplicably dull, and you are secretly taking refuge in a world inside your head in which you are not in that lesson, that adds to your list of problems. Also, when my imagination takes hold, my body takes on a life of its own. When something very exciting happens in my inner world, I've just got to run, I've got to rock backwards and forwards, or sometimes scream. Like this gives me so much energy, and I've got to have an outlet for all that energy. But I've done that ever since I was a child, ever since I was a tiny little girl, and my parents thought it was cute, so they didn't bring it up. But when I got into school, they didn't really agree that it was cute. It can be that people don't want to be friends with the girl that starts screaming in an algebra lesson. And this doesn't normally happen in this day and age, but it can be that people don't want to be friends with the autistic girl. It can be that people don't want to associate with anyone who or can't fit themselves into a box that's labelled normal. But that's fine with me, because it's short, sweet from the chaff, and I can find which people are genuine and true, and I can pick these people as my friends. But if you think about it, what is normal? What does it mean? Imagine if that was the best compliment you ever received. Wow, you are really normal. Compliments are, you are extraordinary, or you step outside the box, you're amazing. So if people want to be these things, why are so many people striving to be normal? Why are people pouring their brilliant individual light into a mold? People are so afraid of variety that they try and force everyone, even if people who don't want to or can't, to become normal. There are camps for LGBTQ people or autistic people to try and make them this normal. And that's terrifying that people would do that in this day and age. All in all, I want to trade my autism and my imagination for the world. Because I am autistic, I've presented documentaries for the BBC, I'm in the midst of writing a book, I'm doing this is fantastic. And one of the best things that I've achieved, that I consider to have achieved, is I've found ways of communicating with my little brother and sister, who, as I've said, are non-verbal, they can't speak. And people would often write off someone who's non-verbal, but that's silly because my little brother and sister are the best siblings that you could ever hope for. They're just the best, and I love them so much, and I care about them more than anything else. I'm going to leave you with one question. If we can't get inside the person's mind, no matter if they're autistic or not, instead of punishing anything that strives from normal, why not celebrate uniqueness and cheer every time someone unleashes their imagination? Thank you.
So that is the lovely Rosie King sharing her experiences as an autistic individual. And I mean, in those 6 minutes, I feel like her talk is layered. And I think about this talk often and how it aligns with the work that I do. But yes, in this season, I feel like we are kind of at a crossroads with autism and really trying to figure out, and it's hard and it's mucky, about how to support our children. And there is not always a, this is exactly how it needs to be done. And that's where we all have our own, right, self-determination as families and our own autonomy, because you know your child best. And within those structures, you are getting input from your child so they have their own autonomy and self-determination. And then we look at this from a whole child perspective, and we see what tools can we use to then support our children within this world. Now, one of the tools that I want to share about has to do with social skills. And notice that I've been saying neurotypical social skills. The reason why I say that is because these social skills that we have centered are neurotypical social skills, right? It's the social skills that a majority of us use-ish. And I say ish because there are also individual differences within that social realm. There's cultural differences. I know that if I'm operating alongside my Chinese, Vietnamese family, my social skills look differently than whenever I went to school at Hartman Elementary School, and I recognized that there are different social behaviors. Okay, so in saying all of that, there are some common pillars of neurotypical social skills. And whereas before it was here are the skills that you are working toward for you to act in a specific way, versus now it's giving access. Hey, did you know there's a whole other set of rules that a lot of the world uses? And I want to give you information about these set of rules so that you can use them when you want to. Or maybe there are times when it's too much for you and you don't want to use these social skills because your social needs are also important. And the one thing that comes to mind for me is this idea of eye contact. I know that, in listening to the autistic community, eye contact has been expressed that it is potentially painful for some individuals to do it for extended periods of time. And so that is something that you would have to ask your child for them to have the language to unveil some of those feelings and sentiments. But I know that for us as parents and for us as educators, we don't want to hurt our children and our students, but we don't know what those needs are unless, right, they have a communication system to express those needs. Now, for a toolkit that a strategy that I love to use when it comes to teaching and giving them access to these neurotypical social skills is providing it through visuals. So if you look at the research out there for autism, one strategy is using visuals to convey some of these social skills that we kind of just know in our heads, but we don't ever really explicitly talk about it. And so what I like to do is I like to get spiral notebooks, usually during August when they're like 19 cents. And I draw out what just happened in terms of a behavior, a social behavior. And then that happens at the top. And then at the bottom, I draw out what is an expected norm for neurotypical social skills. And so in this case, this was a student that I saw him for 5 years, and he was working on conversational turn taking. And so I use a lot of thinking boxes, thought bubbles, and I use talking bubbles, kind of like a Sunday morning cartoon for those of us who are of the age demographic where we had read newspapers. And so, in this case, I was talking about my lunch and Jesse didn't say anything. And so I was like, oh, maybe Jesse isn't listening to me or he's not thinking about me. And so that was an unexpected neurotypical social pragmatic skill. And so at the bottom, I showed him what it looked like to demonstrate an expected social skill. Again, right? I'm acknowledging that these are neurotypical social skills. So I draw it out. How was your lunch? He answers. We were talking about the lunch. And then I draw boxes around each turn because that's a conversational turn. So I do all of this really explicitly. And so this notebook, what I do as a speech language pathologist is that I also talk to the classroom teachers like, hey, Jesse and I use this tool. It's always going to be in his backpack. Here is the function of this tool. And it's kind of like his resource guidebook for neurotypical social skills. I also communicated this tool to his mother. And so, when I spoke to her, I was like, hey, here's what we're doing. And so the awesome thing is that I would see Jesse in the beginning. I saw him twice a week, but then we tapered off and I saw him once a week. But when I came back sometimes, the teacher would draw something in here, or the mom would tell me she looked through the book. So she knew that we were talking about, X, Y, or Z social skills concept. And it was kind of this easy way for us to kind of look through it and be all on the same page. What I think about is I remembered I came one time to speech and I did my typical, hey, Jesse, how are you greeting? And he was hiding under a desk. He was in 5th grade at the time. So that was unexpected in our neurotypical social skills world. And so I waited and he climbed out from under the desk and he was like, oh, uh-oh. And I always use those like movie theater things where it's like take two. And he goes, uh-oh, rewind. Blah, blah, blah. He pulled out his notebook, looked at the page for like neurotypical greetings. And he rewound and he goes, okay, let's try that again. So on his own, right, we are building independent skills. He is figuring out when he wants to use these skills. And then there were other days where I would come and he had big feelings about something that happened. And he communicated a lot through visuals and drawings. He was he communicated through his own visuals, which was amazing. Anyways, and so on another day, he drew out that he was really upset and he was really frustrated with something that happened at school, and that he didn't greet me. And so that was him expressing like, hey, you know what, here's how I'm feeling today and here are the outcomes of it. So this is a lovely tool that I like to use. Again, I'm going to reiterate, right, is that you working alongside Coppell ISD and the VIP educators within your circles. And I know that that relationship takes time and it takes trust and it takes repetition, is that we center your child in the middle through their strengths and their interests through this whole child approach. And then you figure out what strategies you are going to use to then support your child's needs, right? And there's no perfect way of doing this because we're human beings and and it's a dynamic process, this process of communication. And so there's going to be changes and there's going to be growth and there's going to be recalibration along the way. But I do love in the time that I've spent with the district that they are surely invested in having these conversations and these moments and these collaborations. And then I will also say it goes back to asking your child and finding a way for them to express what their needs are, and then we're gonna honor those needs. All right, so this is the last path that we are going to take, and it is about strategies to support our non-speaking children. I'm going to just add the milk and the coffee. Thanks. It is to seek information, to get more information because you don't know. Hey, where is the best place, Jayanti, to get coffee in Coppell? And then the last one is to socialize and to engage. So I could be like, Yaylop, you know, you want to go get a coffee with me? So those are the 4 functions. So when we think about the words that we're going to address in speech language therapy, they need to be words that promote these 4 functions. And those words are called core vocabulary words. What are they? They are about 80 to 90% of the words that we all use across the world. If you were to boil down the words that we usually use, it's about around 200-ish words that we just kind of recycle over and over again. They are high frequency, they are reusable, they're generic words. The thing about core vocabulary words is that they promote generative language. They allow you to address all those 4 functions while using this small group of words. I want, I don't want, I need more information, and I want to socialize. So this is just a common generic 40-word core vocabulary board. And this is where you need the supports of your speech language pathologist because they know your child and you know your child to build up what tool you're going to use. But just even in this, right, I could say for like requesting, I want that. To deny, I not want go. To seek information, where you. Okay, now I acknowledge that this is not grammatical, but you can also work towards that when it comes to using core vocabulary words. And then to socialize, you want go out. Okay, but see, just in these 40 words, you can do that. Now, I have used core boards with as few as 9 words. That's called the Go Talk 9. And I can still, you know, do these 4 functions with just these 9 words. Now, on the other end of the continuum, opposite of core vocabulary words, are vocabulary words that we call fringe words. These are words that are very specific to a certain situation or an activity or a person. So when I was covering a maternity leave in a school district in a middle school, and on Fridays, all the middle schools in this district would all meet to go do bowling. And so the students had their different communication systems and they were all individualized to the student. And for bowling though, for some students, they had a page with just fringe bowling words, or for some students who used just a core board that was a paper version of it that was laminated in thick laminate. I had a strip of words that were bowling words, and I just, you could flip it to add to the core vocabulary board so they could use their core words alongside their bowling words. And so you need both, but core words first. They are very important. What I sometimes see is that so we use visuals, but if I walk in and a student just has a visual board with just nouns, you can only request, and you can actually only request those nouns that we see in the visual. And so we need to think about these core words so they can create these generative dynamic statements that they want to say. I'm also going to say that when there is a communication system that is being practiced and used in speech, the same system also needs to go to the classroom and also needs to come home. Now, for any high-tech device, and I know different districts have different rules, I always say that we need to have a no-tech version of that. So I've made copies of dynamic communication devices, and I laminate it and I put it on a ring, and that goes home and that goes to the classroom teacher. But in the same way that we model words for our speaking children, I'm sure my children heard the word mama thousands of times before they ever said mama. Our non-speaking children deserve the same communication rights. We are going to model using that communication board thousands of times. And just because they don't use it right away, we're going to continually model it because they deserve the same right and exposure to modeling as our speaking children do. Again, speech language pathologists will be able to support you in this endeavor. And then the last thing I want to state is that manners are important. It's a part of our social rules, and manners are important in my household as well. And we do not want manners to be at the top of our priority list before core vocabulary words. I say this because sometimes we teach our children the manners, or we're teaching them the sign. This is the sign for please in American Sign Language. And so I see students saying please, 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 because parents and caretakers are saying say please. But if they're not yet speaking and saying want, or I want that, or cookie, or milk, or whatever it is that are their most important words within their daily functional routines, that having them use their bandwidth to say please is still not letting us know what they need and to access their 4 functions of communication. So tackle the core vocabulary words first, and then, here's the first core vocabulary, then we can supplement with the manners. So I'm going to conclude today by going back to Anne and to Julie, 2 parents, and I asked for them to share with all of us what are some of their biggest takeaways on this communication journey. So Anne said William was rule-based. A book containing graphic representations taught him neurotypical expectations in the class: how to raise his hand to comment, how to ask questions. And for William, this provided step-by-step instructions on how to gain access to his classroom work and his peers in a way that maximized his efforts. And as a parent, I needed to stay involved and interact with his speech language pathologist. And as William got older, I would practice social scenarios with him. So for example, when starting high school, we discussed what to expect and how to communicate his needs. And then Julie, mother to Ollie, she boiled her ahas kind of into 4 arenas. The first one is persistence. And she said, stick with the therapies and celebrate the small wins along the way. Small wins build up to create amazing outcomes, and it takes time to get there. Believe in the process and wait for the progress. Keep your expectations high, that therapy takes work and it's okay to expect that. And I would agree. High expectations with a lot of love. Observations. If you can, attend the sessions, and it's helpful to see and hear the sounds your children's therapist is working on and how the speech pathologist approaches them. I will say that for me, as a school-based speech language pathologist, depending on the campus and the district, and following the communication rules, I would sometimes spend short snippets of videos, making sure that's the family's cell phone number, where it shows the family, this is what it looks like to use this strategy, and this is what it sounds like. Could I do it for every session? No, but I did do it sometimes. And then the last one is playfulness. If you can, try to find someone who is able to make the therapy feel like play. Now, I know that we do not have the privilege of picking our educators and service providers all the time. However, as a parent, I want to give you permission to advocate for your kid. In my paperwork, I ask my families, what kind of a speech pathologist are you looking for? And so let's say, if Hal said, hey, my kid needs someone who is really emotionally sensitive to my child's needs, I'm going to note that. Or if, Seema says, oh, my kid likes a lot of structure, so I need for you to be like, first this, then this. But if the person isn't asking, share that information. Be like, hey, this is my kid, this is what they need, and express that need to us, because we need that complementary energy between you as the parent and me as the educator for us to maximize our impact. All right, so the final thing that I will share is this. It is hard right now in the schools, and I will say that it is hard for us as parents, it is hard for our students, and it is hard for the educators. And I do a lot of advocacy for our educators because they need resources as well. And within all of this hardness, I can tell you through my lens across this whole world in the work that I get to do is that there is so much love and progress and joy, and these small moments that your educators get to have with your child are meaningful. And sometimes it's not represented in the paperwork or in the IEP meeting that you're trying to get through or in the forms that we're asking you. But the one thing is that we need all of us collectively to do it together. What an honor it is to be able to be a part of your children's communication journeys. It truly is. But there's the better in the together, and I'm a big advocate of that. So here's what we're going to do. If you have any specific questions that are specific to your child, here is what I would like for you to do. First, I want you to reach out to your educational team because they know your child. I don't. And you can also reach out to me if you have bigger, broader, general questions. I say this because sometimes I don't have access to all of the things that you have, but I want you to reach out to your VIPs within your child's team to talk about this and to bring this up or to think about it. I gave y'all a lot of information. You cannot do all of the strategies. Pick one or two that you can embed within your days and then talk to your team about it and see, but here's my email address. And it is always an honor to communicate with families. How lucky am I to be able to get to do this the last 20 years plus the decades ahead? And so the last portion of today is what we're going to do is we are going to stop the recording and we are going to have